So the penultimate episode of True Detective is here, and just like what used to happen in Game of Thrones, where episode 9 was the big one, it feels like that's been replicated with this show here. The penultimate episode always tends to deliver the goods, and even though we're only one episode away from the ending of the season, it still does feel like we're miles away from finding out what happened. This episode bridged a few connections, it tied it back to season 1 even more, and it brought this girl, Blair, back into the picture for the third time, and twice when the spiral's been present, with family issues taking center stage. Okay, yeah, I know that's an understatement, but let's jump into the episode and break down all that there was to take away from it. Here is True Detective Season 4 Episode 5, Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The ending and the corruption that's present. Wow. Well, I definitely didn't see that coming. Did you? I knew Pete and Hank had their issues, but jeez. To get why Pete did that, let's go back to an earlier part of the episode. During this episode, we saw the hold that the Tuttles actually have over the town of Ennis and how corruption was touching most parts of the town. For example, we knew that a company which was connected to the Tuttles was funding the Salal Research Center, but as well as that, the LLC that paid the grants that were funding the station was also connected to another company called Norbank Securities. And this was a founding partner of Silver Sky, showing that there were touch points connecting both sides of the mining and also Salal. This was something which was also seeping into the officers that were working in Ennis as well, more specifically Hank and Connolly. Connolly was in the pockets of Kate McKitlid, who had a very suspicious side to her, and we saw that side come to the forefront when she told Hank that she needed him to get rid of Otis Heiss because she feared what would be found if he led Liz and Evangeline down into the cave where Annie's killing happened. Hank specifically said that he wasn't a killer, and after hearing that he'd done something for Kate before for a large amount of money and also with the promise of becoming chief of police before Danvers was relocated there, it was only at the end where we found out what it was that he did. He was the person who moved Annie K's body from the cave to the storage unit where she was found with the promise of money and a promotion. However, due to Liz being moved there, that never happened, hence why there was some frostiness that was always present between the both of them. This shows that the mining company Silver Sky, or Kate, or people that worked there, or even the researchers at Salal were surely behind the death of Annie K, as who else would have known about the cave? The cave sits on Silver Sky property, so why would anybody else be in there? It was clearly a secret, as Annie went there with the intention of finding what the mining company was hiding, hence why she caught it on video. But that's something that I imagine will be revealed in the finale. We still don't know what Annie was looking for, but with Kate saying that Liz can't find what's down there, I'm now the most intrigued that I've been this season. We know that there's the bones of animals that have been laid out in the formation of a spiral, but what else could be down there too? Maybe there is a cult that's present within Ennis and this is where they go. Right at the end of the episode, with Hank arriving at Liz's house, we finally saw his true colors coming out and the corruption and jealousy that lied within him. Hank killed Otis at point-blank range as he was instructed, but then he turned the weapon on Liz. This was until Pete came in, and it was when it seemed like he was going to kill Liz that Pete fired at his father and killed him. The final line that Hank said was "blood is blood," tying back to what he said to Pete a couple of episodes back when he went against his father, basically implying that you should stand by the people that you're related to and always have their back. However, Pete didn't do it at that moment. This moment confirmed two things. Pete is a good cop and believes in the right thing no matter what, the opposite to his father, and he doesn't believe that blood is blood and should be valued above all other things, especially if it gets in the way of justice. Hank was a hypocrite in that sense anyway, because Hank was going through his son's laptop and getting information on the Annie K case and the Wheeler case, and then relaying it back to Kate and Connolly, which was the thing that ultimately made them want to shut it down. Pete's loyalty to not only Liz but also the police force is something that he values above everything else. He's lost not only his wife and his son, the roof over his head, but now his father. Do I think Pete is going to recover from this? With the tone that True Detective usually goes down, I could see Pete having an ending where he's done the right thing in saving Liz's life, but I don't know if he's going to be able to get over it. He could have a dark ending for sure. What's quite poetic about this happening is that only moments earlier in the episode we saw Pete asking questions about the Wheeler case and almost judging Liz and Evangeline for them staging it as though he ended things for himself, when in actual fact he was killed by one of them. And now Pete was having to do the exact same thing for himself, clean up his father's death and make out like he wasn't responsible for it. The case of Annie K and the researchers was deemed to be closed by Connolly in this episode. This was due to the forensics sending back their findings on the bodies and coming to the conclusion that they died due to a weather accident. An avalanche apparently occurred, which is what caused all of the injuries that we saw. This shows the power that the mining company has not only over the town, but over the police force in Alaska in general. The findings came from Anchorage, the police force in the largest city in the state, so it definitely feels like a Tuttle level of corruption and organization like in season 1 of the show. Right at the end of the episode, we saw that Liz and Evangeline were heading to just off of Nixick Pass, which is the highest point of the caves, and they were aiming to get inside of it, which, judging by the trailer, they're going to be successful in doing. With Pete being left to dispose of the bodies of Hank and also Otis Heiss, he's going to be going to Rose and saying, "Take me to Julia," which most likely means that both of those bodies are going to be put in the sea around where Julia's ashes were scattered and will never be found again, allowing the freak accident that's going to be staged to hold some weight to it and become a little bit more believable. Wheeler's death. One of the main things in this episode was centered around us learning more about the Wheeler case and that he was killed by either Liz or Evangeline, and it was staged to look like he'd done it himself after killing his girlfriend. At this point, it could genuinely be either of them, as we've seen 2 different reasons which could support a response. It could be Evangeline because we know that she had a deep-rooted trauma that was connected to her mother being abused by her father and her eventually being killed with the killer never being found. So in visiting the Wheeler house 10 times and gradually seeing Wheeler's girlfriend being beaten down more and more and him getting away with it, with him then finally killing her, something which they always thought would happen, but because of the silence they could never press charges, the connection to that trauma could have driven her over the edge. Plus, with Evangeline seeing the dead body of his girlfriend moving and pointing towards her, that could have also driven her over the edge in being frightened by what she was witnessing. So Evangeline could have definitely been the killer. On the other side of the argument, we've got Liz, who could be responsible for his death and the person who pulled the trigger too. We saw that when they entered the house, Wheeler was whistling the tune to Twist and Shout, a song that's known to cause a negative reaction with Liz. We saw how she was during the first episode in just wanting it to be turned off. Could that be because it's connected to the killing that she did and it plagues her mind? We also know that it played in the background when she was with her son, and we've heard it several times when they were together. So maybe Wheeler whistling the tune, it reminded her of her son that was no longer around and seems was killed in an accident with her partner. And then, with the reaction that she has to it, she could have seen red and fired her weapon at him. I feel it could be Liz. It could genuinely be either of them, and I think both of these scenarios work. I guess we'll just have to wait and see which one is actually responsible for it. The spiral symbol and its connection to Blair. Now, we've seen Blair appear on 3 different times in this season now. The first was right at the start where she was being seen by Evangeline after being beaten up. The second was when Liz returned and showed her colleague the spiral symbol, which elicited a somewhat strange response, accompanied by an odd look on her face when it was shown to her. And the third time was in this episode where she appeared in the laundromat where Karvik returned the stone to Evangeline with the spiral on. So 2 of the 3 times that we've seen her, the symbol has been loosely connected to her. In the first episode, we found out that she'd moved out from her boyfriend's place, who was the person that hit her, and she was now living with the woman who protected her. This lady was actually connected to the Salal Research Center in some way, as she cleaned there a couple of times. When she was shown the symbol, she acted as if she'd never seen it before, and she called over Blair to have a look at it and asked her if she recognized it. I definitely think that these 2 are going to have a larger role to play in the finale. The whole season basically started with them, and they've subtly been appearing throughout the 5 episodes that we've had. I can't quite put my finger on it just yet, but I think there's definitely something going on with them, and they're going to have some kind of involvement in either the cult, the death of the scientists, or the death of Annie K. With regards to the spiral symbol's appearance in this episode, we heard from Kenny that he'd seen it before, and that he saw it as a warning and to just walk away if he ever saw them. Apparently they were warnings that were left to let you know that you were walking on thin ice that would crack and swallow you whole and lead you into the ice caves, something which was called the Night Country. So with Otis saying that Clarke said that he had to hide, that she's out there, that she's awake, and that he was going to go back to the Night Country, surely that means that he's gone to the caves where Liz and Evangeline are going to be heading. One other thing that Otis said that stuck with me was about how he got his injuries and how he managed to survive. He mentioned that 30 years ago there was a cave in where he was working. Men died whilst trapped in the ice, and then once he went out into the blizzard he heard a screaming and a howling, and many of the men were following the sound. But when he tried to stop them, he just woke up in a hospital bed with his injuries. This sounds like something that's awfully similar to the scientists and the behavior that Raymond Clarke is exhibiting. Bear in mind, Otis's events date back 30 years to the cave system that Silver Sky is hiding something in, so I do wonder how it's going to be connected. The finger pointing towards Evangeline. There was another point in this episode where we saw a finger being pointed towards Evangeline. We've seen this occurring several times throughout this season, normally when the dead are trying to get in contact with her, but I think this is something that stems back to her mother. We saw this when Evangeline saw Lund in the hospital and he said, "Your mother is waiting for you." We saw it when Wheeler's girlfriend appeared, and we also saw it in this episode with the young child stopping in the road and pointing towards her. The first time we saw this happen was when Evangeline's mother was having an episode and was laughing erratically and she was cradling her sister. Within this episode, as the young child raised their arm, we heard the word Evangeline being spoken in a haunting way by what sounded like a woman. So I think this is connected to her mother maybe trying to reach out to her. Rose said how the dead want to connect for one of 3 reasons: to either visit you, to show you something, or to take you with them. And it feels like Evangeline's mother is trying to take her with her, just like what we saw happen with Julia, as her mother was after Julia. If you think about it, we've seen her mother's crucifix necklace, Lund mentioning about her mother, and also in this episode it seemed like she had some of her mother's hair in the laundromat before it vanished. So I think Evangeline's ability to see the dead is connected to her mother. It was said that her mother was killed and the killer was never found. Maybe the pointing is occurring because it's pointing towards Evangeline, who could be the killer of her mother, and the guilt of it is starting to plague her mind. The way that Evangeline so easily knew what to do with Hank and Otis showed that maybe she had some experience in this before. Obviously with Wheeler, but what if it goes back further than that? Maybe when she killed her mother. It's a working theory for now, but it's one that I could see potentially coming true. Things the show has to clear up before the end of the season. So even though we're only 1 episode away from the finale, there are still a load of things that the show needs to clear up. So I thought I'd just list the things that need to be wrapped up for this season to be a success. It needs to clear up what happened to Holden and Jake. We need to find out what happened to Evangeline's mother, what happened to Annie Kay, the purpose of Evangeline's flashback in the military, what happened to the scientists, and also what happened to Wheeler. We also need to see how the Silver Sky Company connects to it all, and if Blair or the other women are involved in some capacity. It feels like there are a lot of what happened to's that need answering, and with what I'm imagining is only going to be a 1-hour episode for the finale, I hope it doesn't feel rushed, because a lot of these things happened quite a while ago in the character's history, and we need to see how the characters are going to finish off in the present day in order to get a true sense of resolution. Overall review. I thought this was a really good episode of the show. I think it's actually my favourite of the season. So much happened in it to the point that it felt like it was longer than an hour. I thought showing us the corruption that's present amongst the entirety of Venice was something that felt like the right time to occur. It was a bit abrupt in having us just see Hank sitting in a car with Kate after there not being any real suspicions raised, but I can look past it. Like I said in the previous section, it does feel like there's still a lot that needs answering, and we've not had any real sense of resolution at any point in the show so far, unlike the previous seasons at this point, so I do worry how well paced the final episode is going to be. I thought the performances were really good in this episode. Jodie Foster has definitely grown on me more as the season's gone on. I actually think the same about the character Pete. I actually feel like I've connected with him more than any others. The struggles that he's going through feel real, and the battle to want justice, have a career, care for your family, and provide is something that I think most people can relate to. I thought Kayla was a bit harsh in throwing him out. He seems like a good guy. I found it quite funny and saw the irony in the fact that Evangeline, Pete, and Liz are getting consumed by a case that is about an unsolved murder, when they're all actually responsible for murders that went unsolved in some way. So that's something that's actually pretty funny. The haunting nature of Venice and the way that the environment has almost been made into a character in this season is something that I think has been executed well. The ever-present darkness is something which suits the tone of the story and also makes it feel even more unsettling when the supernatural moments occur. The darkness of the sky, but the bright white of the snow provides an off-balance, contrasting visual that gets across the sense of hostility and uneasiness, especially the fact that it feels cold when watching it. I'm really looking forward to seeing how the show's going to wrap up, and with only 1 episode to go, I really hope it's not a disappointment. So, there you have it, True Detective Season 4 Episode 5, Ending Explained.